In the far northern reaches of the Americas, where winter darkness stretches for months and temperatures plunge to 40 below zero, something remarkable is happening. Honeybees are thriving in Alaska. Not just surviving, thriving. These insects evolved over millions of years in the temperate climates of Africa, Europe, and Asia, environments completely unlike the Alaskan wilderness. Their biology is tuned to seasonal rhythms that simply don't exist this far north. And yet, against every expectation written into their DNA, they're building colonies, producing honey, and pollinating crops in one of the harshest environments on Earth. To understand why this shouldn't work, we need to understand what honeybees actually are. The western honeybee evolved in regions where winters are cold but predictable, where spring arrives in a gradual progression, and where summer provides months of consistent warmth and flowering plants. These bees developed survival strategies shaped by those conditions. When temperatures drop, colonies form tight clusters, vibrating their flight muscles to generate heat. The queen stops laying eggs. The workers consume stored honey to fuel their metabolism. They wait out the cold in a state of coordinated endurance, trusting that warmer days will return within a time frame their food stores can sustain. Alaska breaks all those rules. Winter doesn't just arrive, it dominates. In much of the state, freezing temperatures can persist from October through April. That's 7 months. The bees' evolutionary programming expects perhaps 3 or 4 months of true cold. Their stores, their clustering behavior, their breeding cycles, all of it is calibrated for temperate winters, not subarctic marathons. And then there's summer. When Alaska's summer finally arrives, it doesn't ease in gently. Temperatures can swing wildly. The midnight sun creates nearly 24 hours of daylight, a phenomenon no honeybee ancestor ever experienced. Flowering plants explode into bloom all at once, compressed into a narrow window. The entire rhythm is wrong. And yet, beekeepers started bringing hives to Alaska in the early 20th century. Some were hobbyists. Others were testing whether commercial pollination could work this far north. The early attempts were experiments, often ending in winter losses. Colonies would enter the cold months and simply fail to emerge. The bees would run out of food, or the queen would stop producing enough workers, or the cluster would break apart during an unexpected cold snap. For decades, it seemed like the land itself was rejecting these insects. But a small number of colonies survived. And those survivors revealed something unexpected. Researchers began to notice patterns. The colonies that made it through Alaskan winters weren't just lucky, they were different. Some lines of bees appeared to cluster more tightly, conserving heat with greater efficiency. Others demonstrated unusual foraging behavior, taking advantage of the intense but brief summer bloom with remarkable aggression. Queens in successful hives maintained higher brood production later into the fall, building up worker populations that could sustain the cluster through longer periods of darkness. These weren't random mutations. These were adaptations, the signature of natural selection operating in real time. Scientists studying cold climate beekeeping have found that honeybees possess more genetic flexibility than previously understood. When a population faces novel environmental pressures, traits that were rare or suppressed in the ancestral environment can become advantageous. In Alaska, colonies that happened to carry genes for cold tolerance, efficient resource use, and rapid spring buildup had a survival edge. Over generations, those traits became more common. Beekeepers, intentionally or not, were also selecting for these characteristics. They kept the hives that survived. They bred queens from the strongest colonies. Slowly, an Alaskan bee began to emerge, not a new species, but a population shaped by its environment. Temperature management is only part of the challenge. Honeybees rely on a steady progression of blooming plants throughout the growing season. In temperate zones, different species flower in sequence: early spring blossoms, midsummer crops, late-season wildflowers. This staggered bloom allows bees to build their food stores gradually. Alaska offers no such luxury. When the snow melts and the ground thaws, everything blooms at once. Fireweed, clover, wild roses, berry bushes, they all flower within a few short weeks. The bees have a narrow window to gather nectar, produce honey, and store enough surplus to survive the next 7-month winter. It's a biological sprint with no room for error. Beekeepers in Alaska have adapted their practices to match this compressed timeline. They feed their colonies supplemental sugar syrup in early spring, giving the bees a head start before the bloom begins. They insulate hives with foam boards and windbreaks, reducing heat loss during the coldest months. Some use special hive designs that allow better air circulation without sacrificing warmth, preventing moisture buildup that can kill a cluster even if the temperature stays survivable. These techniques aren't standard in southern beekeeping. They're innovations born from necessity, developed through trial and observation in an environment that punishes mistakes. The midnight sun introduces another variable. Honeybees navigate and communicate using the sun's position. Their famous waggle dance, the figure-8 movement that tells other bees where to find flowers, relies on solar cues. But in Alaska's summer, the sun barely sets. It circles the horizon, creating perpetual twilight. Research suggests that bees adjust their internal timing mechanisms to compensate, recalibrating their circadian rhythms to function under constant light. This plasticity, this ability to rewrite their behavioral programming on the fly, is part of what makes their survival possible. They aren't just enduring Alaska, they're learning it. Pollination is the reason many of these colonies exist in the first place. Alaska's agricultural industry, though small by continental standards, depends on honeybees. Greenhouses, berry farms, and vegetable growers all rely on managed hives to pollinate their crops. Without bees, yields would plummet. Native pollinators exist, bumblebees, solitary bees, and other insects. But their populations are often insufficient for commercial needs, and their activity windows don't always align with crop blooming periods. Honeybees, with their large colonies and manageable hives, fill that gap. They provide a service that the ecosystem alone cannot deliver at the scale required. This creates an interesting ecological question. Honeybees in Alaska are not native. They are, by definition, an introduced species. In other contexts, introduced species can disrupt ecosystems, outcompeting native insects for resources. Studies on this topic in northern climates have produced mixed findings. Some research indicates that honeybees do compete with native pollinators for nectar and pollen, particularly in areas with limited floral diversity. Other studies suggest that in regions with abundant blooms, the impact is minimal. The truth likely depends on the specific location, the density of managed hives, and the health of native pollinator populations. Scientists continue to monitor these dynamics, weighing the agricultural benefits against potential ecological costs. What remains clear is that honeybees were never supposed to make it this far north on their own. Their presence in Alaska is the result of human intervention, assisted by the bees' own genetic adaptability. Without beekeepers providing shelter, supplemental food, and selective breeding, it's unlikely wild colonies would persist through multiple generations. The environment is simply too extreme. And yet, once given that initial support, the bees responded. They adjusted. They survived. This story is part of a larger pattern. Across the world, honeybees are living in environments far outside their evolutionary origin. They've been introduced to every continent except Antarctica. In some places, they've become naturalized, forming feral populations that sustain themselves without human management. In others, like Alaska, they exist in a state of assisted survival, dependent on the infrastructure and knowledge beekeepers provide. Each population tells a story of adaptation, of biological limits being tested and sometimes exceeded. Alaska's honeybees shouldn't exist because their biology wasn't built for this. But they do exist because biology is not as rigid as we sometimes imagine. Evolution isn't a fixed script. It's a conversation between organism and environment, one that continues as long as both are present. The bees that survive Alaskan winters are not the same as their ancestors from warmer climates. They carry the same species name, but they've been reshaped by forces their lineage never encountered. That reshaping happened quickly, across just decades. A reminder that adaptation can occur on human timescales when the pressure is strong enough. Understanding this matters for more than just Alaska. As climates shift and temperatures change, knowing how species respond to novel environments becomes critical. Honeybees are economically important, yes, but they're also a model for studying resilience. Their success in Alaska demonstrates both the power of genetic diversity and the limits of biological tolerance. It shows that with the right conditions, enough genetic variation, enough human support, enough time, life can establish itself in places it was never meant to reach. And it reminds us that the boundaries we draw around what's possible are often more flexible than we think.